Alright, APUSHers, let's get started today on the short answer question, or SAQ. This is updated for the 2017-2018 administration for the AP US History exam. So what is the SAQ? The short answer question or questions are meant to check your analytical skills. In other words, your ability to pick out meaning and explain it. Beginning in the 2017 to 2018 school year, you're going to be tested or assessed on your analysis of historical sources using one or more of the following skills: argumentation, causation, and comparison. We'll go over each of those types as the school year goes on. The response to each short answer question is no more than 3 to 4 sentences per part. We'll go over that in a minute, hence the short description. This portion of your exam, the short answer questions, is 20% of your overall exam score. So how does this work? Beginning in the 2017 to 2018 school year, the College Board is going to require you to answer 3 of 4 short answer questions on your APUSH exam. That's about 40 minutes for this section of the test, or about 13 minutes per each question. The first 2 questions you're going to see are going to give you a stimulus. That's what they call it. In other words, a document, an image, or some other source that you have to analyze. The choice questions, either question 3 or 4, does not have a stimulus, so you have to respond to the question using your background knowledge. So again, you're required to answer the first and second questions, and then your choice of either the third or the fourth question. So some basics about the question itself. So each question contains 3 parts, A, B, and C. So you'll have 1A, 1B, 1C. For each part, you must directly answer the question or prompt. You need to label each part. You must include specific, relevant historical terms, events, or details to support your response. That's called evidence. And you must explain how your evidence answers the question. Do not, however, write a paragraph, write a thesis statement, use bullet points, write in sentence fragments, or quote from any excerpts provided. So again, your job here is analysis, explanation, not a summary of what you already see in front of you. You might want to pause your video right now and take a look again at a review of the skills that you're going to be assessed on for each of the questions here. So let's get to each particular question and we'll look at what's expected from you, and we'll also look at a sample for each type of question. So SAQ question 1 again is about the skill of argumentation. This question is going to test your ability to analyze, again explain, secondary sources. You'll respond in writing to a historian or historian's arguments about people or events in US history. Question 1 is going to address content from any of the time periods, and that's what we call units in APUSH, 3 through 8 of this course. So anything from 1754 to 1980 is up for grabs here. And you'll see here at the bottom, these are the skills or question stems that you're most frequently going to see on question 1 about secondary sources. So describing claims or arguments of these sources and the evidence used to support, describing patterns or trends in data in non-text-based sources, explaining how a historian's claim or argument is supported with evidence, explaining how the historian's context or background influences their claim or argument, analyzing patterns and trends in data in non-text-based sources, so basically charts and graphs, or evaluating the effectiveness of a historical claim or argument. So let's take a look at a sample question. You might want to pause here so that you can read the 2 sources. On the left here, you have 2 arguments about the history of the expansion westward in the United States history by 2 different historical figures. One, Frederick Jackson Turner, who was a historian who wrote a famous essay called The Significance of the Frontier in American History, and you'll cover that later this year in APUSH. And you also have a more recent historian writing about the history of Manifest Destiny and Movement West. You also want to take a look at the question. So again, you have question 1, and you'll have A, B, and C parts to answer. Each of these goes over, again, one of those specific skills and question stems that you're going to be expected to answer. So describing claims or arguments, explaining how claims or arguments are supported, and how a historian's context influences the claim or argument. So again, you might want to pause here, take a look at the question types and what you're expected to do. SAQ question 2, again required of you to answer on the test. The second question is going to test your skill of either causation or comparison and asks you to respond in writing to a primary source this time, usually a written text or a visual source such as an image, chart, or map. This question is also going to address content from time periods 3 through 8 of this course, so 1754 to 1980. Unlike question 1, this time you're going to be looking at primary sources, so things that were written or created within a certain time period by a person living in that time period. So describing historically relevant information or arguments in that source, explaining how the source provides information about historical settings in which it was created, explaining how the source's point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience might affect that source's meaning. We'll go over the term happy or CAPI later this year with your teacher. Explaining the relative historical significance of, again, point of view, purpose, historical situation, or audience, or evaluating a source's credibility or limitation, so bias. Let's take a look at a sample question. So on the left, again, you have a primary source. You're given the title. Sometimes you'll also be given the date. And that context, the title, dates, things within the picture are really going to help you explain what's going on. So again, when you get a question like this, you want to really take a look at that primary source document and think about what it's telling you before you start to answer the question. You also have question 2, prompt, and you have parts A, B, and C. And again, at the bottom, you're going to see that this is testing your ability to describe historically relevant information and arguments, and explaining the relative historical significance and how that source provides information about history through point of view, purpose, context, audience, or the setting in which it was created. So again, take a moment to pause, take a look at the question and the primary source before you move on to question 3 and 4. Alright, so SAQ question 3 and 4, again, you get to choose to answer either the third or the fourth question. Now here you really want to take a minute to think about which time period do I know the most about. Now starting off the year, you might not know anything about U.S. history, and that's okay. At the end of the year, you should be able to really gauge which part of history do you know best, and that's the question you really want to go with here. You don't get extra points because you're really challenging yourself. I don't really know what this means, but I'm going to try it anyway. You don't get extra points for that, so really answer the question that you know. Again, these questions 3 and 4 are going to ask you about general ideas about U.S. history, and they're generally going to test the same skill, causation or comparison, but not the same skill as question 2. So if you got a causation question for question 2, you're probably going to see comparison questions in questions 3 and 4. For questions 3 and 4, you're not going to be given any sort of stimulus. Remember the primary or secondary sources. Instead, you're drawing from your specific background knowledge, also called context in this class, about one of these historical periods. You'll be asked to explain similarities and differences between people or events, usually over time, or causes or effects of these people or events with causation or comparison. So let's take a look at some sample prompts. Okay, on the top you're going to see a sample prompt from period 1 through 5. Again, you're going to answer parts A, B, and C. And you have for period 1 through 5 a question here about the anti-slavery movement between the period 1780 and 1810 and in the period 1830 to 1859. So question A and B are going to ask you to think about similarities and differences in the movement, and then question C is going to ask you to explain an effect of the anti-slavery movement in either 1780 to 1810 or the period 1830 to 1859. So as you're reading each prompt, really be careful and think about, what do I know about each period? And if it asks you to explain a similarity or difference, you must do that. You must answer both parts, 1780 to 1810 and 1830 to 1859. C, you're going to choose which period you talk about, so be careful. For question 4, periods 6 through 9 is what you're going to be focusing on. So again, you're going to choose which time period you think you can best answer the question for. You have parts A, B, and C for question 4. This time you're going to be asked about similarities, differences, and effects of mass media in the 1920s and the 1950s. So generally you're going to see a question where there are similarities called continuities and changes between periods that seem very similar in history. So we'll take a look at that as well in your class. So you might want to pause here again, take a look at the prompts and what they might be asking you to do. Alright, so let's talk about some strategies, in particular one called ACE, that'll really help you flesh out your answer and make sure you get complete points for your SAQ. So the ACE strategy is a way to make sure you fully answer each part of every question. So for each part, A, B, and C, you'll want to use ACE for each part. Okay, so A, answer the prompt. Make a claim. What does the question ask you to do? What skill do you have to demonstrate? Again, is it question 1 where you have argument interpretation, or is it question 2 or 3 and 4? So causation, comparison, what is it asking you to do? Then, use the prompt to help develop the first part of your answer. Create a beginning sentence using the question itself, then add in your claim as the answer. Okay, so if the prompt is a vague description like, what is the issue? What is the problem? You need to identify that as well. We'll take a look at a sample here in just a minute. Okay, so that's the first part, A. C, you're going to cite evidence. Again, you need to use specific, historically relevant examples to support your claim. Okay, so the strategy, you might want to use a stem like for example, or one example of this was, and then explain how that answers your question. That's the E part. How or why does this evidence support your claim? What's the overall answer to the question? So, as a result, this suggests that. Okay, so ACE. Let's take a look at a sample question and a response using the ACE strategy. Alright, so let's take a look at question 2A from earlier. And it asks you to briefly describe one perspective about citizenship in the image. So for 2A, let's first answer the first part of the prompt. In this case, this is a question about an argument within the source. Create a beginning sentence using the question itself, then add in your claim as the answer. So we're going to use the first part of the question. One perspective about citizenship in this image is that giving freedmen or African Americans the right to vote allowed them to become full citizens of the U.S. following the Civil War. So you're answering the prompt, right? You've got your first part. Now we're going to give some evidence that's going to be specific and connects our prompt to our answer. Okay, so one example to support this perspective is that in the image, freedmen of all backgrounds, and you can see that in the picture, given the rights of citizenship and voting in the 14th and 15th Amendments, were eager to vote for the first time. So I used specific evidence of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which allowed freedmen to vote, and tied it to my first part. Okay, so that giving freedmen the right to vote allowed them to become full citizens. Then E, I'm going to explain my connection between my evidence and my first part of answering the prompt. This image therefore suggests that voting is one of the most important and revered civic duties of an American, no matter your background, because it gave all people a voice. Okay, so that is your complete answer for question 2A. Okay, so put parts A, C, and E together, and that would be a full response. This is how the College Board is expecting to score each response. There isn't a specific rubric as of the time of this video, but they also point out here that for a good short answer question response, It needs to accomplish asking you to answer all three parts, and that you've done that using specific historical evidence and explaining how the evidence supports your answer. You might want to take a minute to pause and look at the scoring for your response. You want to wrap this up and talk about, again, big ideas about answering the SAQ. 1. Answer the prompt, right? AP stands for Advanced Placement, but it also means answer prompt, answering the prompt. 2. Include specific, relevant historical evidence to support your answer. When you can, use the document or image, but don't quote it. So if you get text, you should not have a specific quote because this is short. And you're analyzing, you're explaining. You're not giving us a summary. And then use outside information, context, like key vocabulary, people, events, to help support your answer. Explain how your answer and the evidence go together, and make sure that you label and answer each part of the prompt to get points. That's the end of our presentation. If you have specific questions, feel free to email or go see your teacher.